It's me once again. I'm on your computer screen talking about penises. Probably not only about penises. This isn't like a men's health channel where I talk about how to massage your balls and look for lumps that might indicate ball cancer. Testicular cancer, I guess, would be the medical term. Maybe that would be a successful YouTube channel, though. You never know. You never know what's going to go viral. Maybe Skeletor's testicular health channel would be successful. You must rub your testicles individually in slow circular motions, searching for lumps or other protrusions which may indicate cancerous growth. Yeah! I'm Skeletor! Take care of your balls! It sounds like, remember how all the PSAs about like drugs and peer pressure were delivered by animated characters? Because they're like, kids will listen to Raphael from the Ninja Turtles. They didn't understand that we didn't look up to them. We understood that they were cartoon characters, that they were a bunch of drawings made by Koreans in a sweatshop somewhere. The only thing it did was raise awareness that there were kids selling drugs that we could get, you know, we could score weed from. Look at that backfire. I want more cows. I'm not satisfied with that. That's an inadequate number of cows. Do I have any? I don't. I need more wheat first. Before I harvest, actually I should harvest anyway, just so I don't waste time. Every moment that I'm not growing something is wasting this farm, basically. Sounds like a jazz song. Every moment that I'm not growing something, wasting this farm, baby, yeah. I didn't say it was a good song. I didn't promise you shit. I told you things would be rough after your mom and I split up. I can't always come up with the songs that you like. In like some alternate universe where parenting is mostly about novelty songs. I don't know what comes out of my mouth. I really need to think about what I fucking say. Although if I did, it would be much less funny. Most of my comedic value comes from demented baboosery and not really considering the consequences of what I'm about to say. Like today, I got into a whole Facebook blow up because this girl I know who's pretty, and we were on good terms. We were friends, but she shared publicly this message that this guy sent her, and it was an innocuous message. There was nothing sinister or inappropriate about it. He just said that he apologized for messaging her, but he found her profile scintillating. Scintillating is not necessarily lewd, but he was old and unattractive, so she posted it publicly, making him an object of ridicule, number one, and he works in IT, so I related to him a fuckload more than I related to her, because he's a nerd. And she held him up and invited all of her friends to mock him, to mock his efforts to, you know, not die alone, basically. And I guess in Tumblr language, that was real fucking triggering. Because I've been there. I've been the nerd who got ridiculed for daring to approach a pretty popular girl. That's fucking cruel. That's doing that to somebody just because they presumed to approach your highness and compliment you. Well, there was nothing like lewd about what that guy said. But anyways, she has a bunch of female friends who are super feminist and jumped all over me saying, yeah, well, there's a bunch, you know, that's how it always starts, but, you know, men always make it inappropriate after that. And I'm like, well, he didn't do that. You can't treat all men. They're like, oh, well, hashtag not all men. And I'm like, what is that except for a transparent justification for generalizing an entire subset of humanity? And how is that different? They're like, well, it is different because we're protecting ourselves. We've all had a pattern of bad experiences with men. And I'm like, okay, but there are a lot of white people in the South who've had a pattern of bad experience with black Americans, and that's what they base their racism off of. They say that they're not being bigoted, they're just defending themselves. And it's exactly the same thing. When you are distrustful of an entire subset of humanity that is defined by an inborn trait, based on a pattern of bad experiences with them in the past, that's called prejudice. That's what prejudice is, even if it's often vindicated. The idea behind egalitarianism, to my knowledge, correct me if I'm wrong, is not that those patterns don't exist, but that we're supposed to pretend that we don't notice them for the sake of the people who are decent and don't, so that they don't get lumped in, so they don't get blamed for what other people who look like them do. I don't think they can wrap their heads around that. They think that bigotry always has to be based on falsehood, and they think that there's no such thing as you know, black on black crime in this country. Anyways, that's my controversial thing for today. It still hasn't netted me any views. Any publicity is good publicity. Get outraged. Give me fucking attention and clicks. Fuck, I need bone meal. Am I wrong, though? I mean, how are humans supposed to reproduce if there's no correct way to approach a woman? If you don't know if you're attracted to her until you approach her, and if you do approach her and she doesn't find you attractive, whatever you say is creepy. And according to you know, some feminist blogs, you've raped her by expressing unwanted interest. This is why, you know, there's no population growth in the developed world. A lot of people don't know that. The birth rate in the United States and all developed countries is negative. It's at or below replacement level. 100% of U.S. population growth comes from immigration, because those are the countries where you can approach a woman and where it's still possible for men to approach women and try to woo them and have children. That's not okay to do anymore here. That's sexist and problematic, which is why we're not having babies. That's happening in Japan too, but for really fucking different reasons. It's complicated. But boo fucking who that men you don't think are attractive sometimes approach you. It's a good problem to have most of the time. And, you know, if you want to single out men as the primary perpetrators of violent and sexual crimes, why not get more specific than that? Why not look for any patterns in proportion and race? The answer, of course, is because these, you know, they haven't thought of that, and they didn't realize what a can of worms they were opening up by singling out a subset of humanity based on inborn traits like that. If you look at, you know, who's committing a disproportionate amount of those crimes and break down by rate, but using the same government statistics that they use to blame men for these crimes in the first place. You're just being more precise about it. You're asking the question they don't want to ask, which is which men? Specifically, which men are committing more than what you would expect their share of these crimes to be, given their percentage of the population. And that's an extremely fucking dicey topic to talk about, but if they're going to get all identity politics about it, if they're going to bring gender into it, why is race off limits? And it's crazy. You say this stuff and they identify you as the bigoted one, even though what you're ultimately saying is in opposition to bigotry and identifying them as bigoted. I don't think that there's a kind of bigotry that is special, that is better than any other kind. Like, you don't have to convince them that racism is wrong, but you do have to convince them that bigotry against men exists and is a thing and is not justifiable. I think because there's been such a successful campaign to diminish and discredit the reality of black crime in the U.S., that we've drunk our own Kool-Aid instead of recognizing that it's something that we do to help Black Americans who are not causing any problems get a leg up and not be lumped in with those people, we've actually begun to believe that there's no such thing as black crime, and that that's all invented by the government as a pretext to imprison young black men or something absurd like that. But they sure as hell believe that men are a problem, because they've had personal experience with men misbehaving. What they don't understand is that men are everywhere. So the amount of male misbehavior that women experience is going to be much higher than the amount of misbehavior they experience in terms of black men specifically, because there are only black Americans and white Americans living side by side in certain parts of the United States. And that's a rare situation around the world in general. Less and less rare with each passing day, but that's why they personally encounter a lot more general male misbehavior than the reality of interracial violence and rape that people in the South are more familiar with, because surprise, surprise, there's a lot more black Americans in the South. That's why they're racist, is day-to-day experience with poor blacks. And if you want to say it's because they're poor, probably you're right, is the sad truth of it. And if you have only a few bad apples committing black on black crime, that destabilizes the larger community. That causes more retaliation, that causes more defensive violence, that causes black Americans who are well-meaning to go out and buy guns to protect themselves, which in turn causes more gun crime. So that may well be the case. It seems entirely plausible to me that you can have even a slightly larger incidence of violence in a group just because of a couple troublemakers, and it can destabilize the social cohesion of that group, cause more criminality, and make it difficult to escape poverty. But nevertheless, even if that's the case, that's just addressing why it happens, why it is that way. And if it is that way, then they should recognize they're not better. Women who are prejudiced against men because of a pattern of bad experiences with men are not morally better than white Southerners who are racist because of a pattern of bad experience with poor blacks. It's the same thing. It's 100% the same thing. And I feel like I can say this because, number one, I'm self-employed and use a pseudonym, so there's no way for anybody to dox me and take away what I have anymore by necessity, because I got doxed and ruined once before. So I basically had to go into business for myself, and it was actually one of the better things to happen to me, because it forced me to find a way of supporting myself that was immune to that sort of attack. And I'm also fucking autistic, so when I see a naked emperor, I say he's got no clothes on, and damn the consequences. I did that with religion, and I'll do that with any social issue that Tumblr thinks I'm not supposed to talk about. Fuck you. I'll talk about whatever I fucking want to. You're not the cops. You're not the cops. You don't tell me what I can fucking talk about. We have more in common than different. Ostensibly, we both want a country in which the widest possible variety of people all have the same opportunities to succeed and are not encumbered by the shitty, bigoted attitudes of other people. We only seem to differ in that I identify bigotry against men as being real, as being a kind of bigotry, and Tumblr does not. They have their own pet hatreds that they consider valid, and that they are every bit as bitterly defensive of as, these alt-right neckbeards are defensive of their own hatreds of women, of minorities. I'm not saying that's acceptable. Obviously it isn't. I have a shitload more in common with a black man in terms of what I want out of my life and what I think is cool and how I want this country to be than I do with any fucking neon-haired, problem glasses wearing, obese, fucking gothopotamus Tumblrite mutant. And I think that's actually the case for most Southerners too. I think what we identify as racism is white, liberal Northerners who live in states with almost no blacks in this state. There's almost no blacks in northern states. I live in Oregon. We have one of the whitest states in the country, and we are also the least racist, and that's not a coincidence. If you don't experience the reality of living around large numbers of poor blacks, then it's easy to not be racist. It's easy to not hate people that you never encounter, so you never have a chance to encounter any misbehavior from. But if you look at a map of the U.S. where the concentrations of where African Americans live, it's pretty much, it aligns very closely with the southern states, what we call the South. That's why Southerners are racist. They are the ones who encounter black Americans every day. So they encounter the good and the bad. They encounter the best and the worst that you can experience from that group of people. And again, I do think it is a poverty thing because I've encountered a lot of poor white people that I would kind of like to feed into a food processor. If you've never encountered snaggle-toothed, wall-eyed, mutant, inbred country people, although that's not fair, that's a kind of bigotry too, but still, at the same time, if you've never experienced that, you don't know that it doesn't know any skin color. That is just, it's a class issue more than it is anything else. It's basically saying I don't like being around people who live in poverty because it makes them rough and it makes them desperate and inclined to steal from me and makes them more violent because they have had more violent lives. It's a multi-dimensional issue. It has mostly to do with class, I think. I think people are much more able to behave in what we call a civilized way when they have enough food to eat, when they have clothes, and when they feel safe, when they don't feel like the larger society is out to get them. And a lot of blacks feel that way, and they're right. They're right. If you look at me and you tell me there's no such thing as racist cops who went into the force specifically to hassle black guys, you're living in a fantasy world. All you have to do is know a cop and ask him about it, and ask him about the stuff that he's heard in the locker room, to know that's a real thing. And that's not paranoia. That's not inventing a threat. That is a real threat to the safety and survival of black men in the United States. So I'm 100% with people who say we need more checks and balances on cops. Because when you sign up to be a cop, you're signing up to have absolute power over other people's lives. And that power requires a lot of, you can't just give that to anybody. Did I do this right? No, I didn't. Like, how come police officers across or not the officers, but the departments are in opposition to body cams? I guess it's hypocritical to not want the government watching me, but to want the government monitoring cops. But at the same time, cops are not citizens. They're not private citizens. They have power private citizens do not have. I'll never know what it's like to be targeted by a cop because of my race, probably. But I do know in a general sense that if you give somebody a gun and you allow them to legally have a gang with a bunch of other guys dressed the way that they are, who also have guns, that had better be the most tightly regulated fucking club of people in terms of what they're allowed to do in the history of humankind. So otherwise you're asking for all the kinds of shit that cops regularly do and have gotten away with. Having said that, the people who like BLM needs to choose their battles better, because in a lot of those cases there was evidence from the autopsy that the cop's account that the guy charged him and tried to take his gun was true. And if a guy charges you and tries to take your gun, even if you're a cop, it's okay to shoot him. You don't have to Being a cop does not mean you have a legal obligation to let somebody kill you. They don't want to hear that, though. That doesn't fit the narrative. And they propagate their own narrative so effectively that by the time the truth comes out, but the media circus is over and everybody already believes the false version of events that supports the narrative that they want to support. But in other cases, like the Freddie Gray case, it was very, very clear, both before and after the autopsy, that he was killed. Because nobody breaks their neck riding in the back of a van unless there was a deliberate attempt to do it. I mean, that's my opinion, and I do reserve the right to have opinion about this stuff. I don't think it's kosher to say you are a certain race, therefore you don't get to have an opinion about these issues. How are you going to fucking stop me? How are you going to stop me? I have an opinion about things. I'll say what I want. Unless you come here and fucking fight me, I'll continue to say what I want. And you can't get Big Brother to shut me up. You can't take away my money. You can't take away shit from me. I don't think there's anything wrong with me. I think I have a balanced view of racial and gender politics in the United States. I just don't think I have the view that Tumblr wants to propagate, which is not a balanced view. They have a very slanted view, and they justify their slanted view by saying, well, the narrative in this country is already slanted in favor of cis hetero white males, so being biased in the other direction balances things out. No, it doesn't, because fucking Tumblrites now dominate every university. So only their version of events gets taught to college kids, which creates a generation that is radicalized against a particular race and gender of people, which is a problem. And if I belong to that group, I have every right to advocate in my own self-interest that kids not be taught that it's okay to kill me. And that is, you can find pages upon pages on Tumblr saying it's okay to kill white men and kill all white people and kill all men. And how wonderful the world would be if all men were killed, and I want to someday have to explain to my granddaughter what men were, and those kinds of things. And you can't sweep that under the rug. There is no white organization that you would let stuff like that slide from and let them say, oh, it's just a joke and get away with it. Why do you expect to be treated differently and better and preferentially? Why do you expect to be able to say stuff like that and get away with it as a joke? I take that seriously. When you threaten to kill me and my family and everybody I love for racial reasons, I pay attention. I would be a fool not to pay attention. If you don't pay attention to somebody threatening you and everybody you care about, and if they're fighting you and you don't fight back and in fact help them fight you, then you're a fool. You're a fool and you deserve what they do to you. Thankfully, most people are not really radicalized about stuff like this. Most people you meet on the street are not super politically charged about issues like this. They're just regular people like you looking to survive, make a living. The people who get really into this stuff are generally afraid. They're insecure. And when you're afraid, you look for somebody, you look for a mob, a torches and pitchforks wielding mob you can join and be a part of to feel stronger and safer. The problem is if one group does that and they feel unsafe, they feel that 100% of men, for example, are dangerous and a problem, and they mobilize against men, then men are going to mobilize in return. And it's going to escalate, and that's not going to go in a good direction. You're not going to like where that ends up. I'm pretty sure, we've been down that road before. And World War II was not fought by women against men. It was men against men. If it had been men against women, there would be no women left in the world. It was also fought by men who didn't realize what the world was going to become, or that we were going to be living in a future where they would be vilified and their descendants would be vilified because of how they look. If they had known that, probably they would have fought for the other side. Should they have? Would they be right to? That's an open question. That remains to be seen. Why is there no room in the world for balance? Why do you have to be an extremist? Why do you either have to be a radical communist or an alt-right Nazi? Why can't I have a worldview where it's okay for me to live and exist and be who I am, and it's also okay for you to be who you are and how you are? Why do we have to fight each other? I don't think we have to fight each other. I don't think it has to be that way. But if you attack me, I'm gonna fight. I'm gonna fucking fight you. Why don't I? Why should I not have the right to retaliate? Why should somebody else have the right to antagonize me, but I don't have the right to retaliate? That's stupid. Why would I agree to that? That's transparently designed to fuck me. That's a bad deal. I mean, am I crazy? Am I crazy? And you talk about these radicals, and you know, the feminists in front of you will deny they exist, and they'll say, "Oh, nobody really says that." So you show them gigabytes and gigabytes and gigabytes of screenshots. And you're like, first of all, they're like, "Why do you have this?" I mean, they challenge you to show them that stuff, and then they're mad that you actually have it to show them. What the fuck is that? Did they not want you to have the evidence that they just asked for? The second thing is, they deny the first one is a fluke, and then they say, oh, you show them the second one, they say the second one's a fluke. You show them the third one, they say the third one's a fluke. After the 40th or 50th picture, they just start to get mad with you. They start to insult you. Like that, they don't really argue. They're not very good at argument. If you try to argue with them in a structured and reasoned way, they recoil from it. It's like it's painful for them. They rely almost entirely on emotion, and they will say things like, "God, ugh, I can't believe it's 2017 and you don't agree with me. How come you don't automatically agree with me? You should just have come out of the womb holding my exact values." That's also what Christians feel, how they feel. You're exactly the same fucking way. You have an ideology you can't defend, so you want everybody to just automatically have been born into the same belief system as you. That would be very convenient. Many different ideologies want to have that privilege of living in a world where everybody is just raised to believe the way that they do, because they can't convert anybody to their way of thinking because they don't have any good arguments, or they don't know how to argue. Insulting somebody is not argument. Saying that they're gross or disgusting is not argument. And I've learned that a lot of these buzzwords, like gaslighting, is a real thing that happens, where you try to convince somebody that they're remembering something wrong. But I've personally experienced it used to basically mean disputing a woman's version of events. She can make shit up or misremember it provably. You can have a screenshot that shows what she said and that she's lying about what she said, and she'll say you're gaslighting her. And that happened during the dispute that I was having. She said, "You're gaslighting me." And I'm like, you can't possibly know what that word means if you think that's what I'm doing. It's just a buzzword. It's a buzzword Tumblr taught her. Something to accuse men of. I don't have to put up with that shit. God, I wish I were fucking gay. I have gay friends and they tell me, no, you don't. You don't wish you were gay. It doesn't make things easier. It makes it way more complicated. And I believe them. But at the same time, it seems like just. But at the same time, not all women, of course, are Tumblr creatures. It's mostly just American white college students who have been indoctrinated by professors very deliberately. This has been ongoing since World War II. There's been a concerted effort to dominate the social sciences with a particular worldview and to teach it to college students as if it were scientific truth, when it includes a great many claims about biology, for example, that biologists will tell you are not true, such as that biological sex is a social construct. And they say that. I'm not saying gender. I understand what gender is. But I have screenshots of them saying that biological sex itself, male and female, does not really exist and is something that we have socially constructed. And because somebody wants to play adult, pretend, dress up, and cosplay as a woman, and they want to brainwash the entire world into seeing gender in a particular way for their happiness and comfort, which is kind of an unreasonable request. You can do whatever you want, but you can't require the entire world to humor you. Am I just getting more conservative as I get older? Why is that happening? Was this shit true all along and I'm just developing my understanding of things to the point where I realize it, or am I just becoming an old man and not understanding all this shit? Because I don't really want to, like, when I was a kid, the future was flying cars. It was cities on the moon. It was robot butlers. It was not transsexual, genderqueer Muslims with neon hair. That does not improve the world in any way. Having otherkin, furry, transracial, intersex, demisexual, whatever the fucks, having the streets be walked every day outside by mutants and monsters does not improve the world. Does not make it a better place to live. Does not get humanity anywhere that it couldn't already go. That's not going to take us to Mars. Cutting up our genitals does not get us to Mars. And can you fucking imagine if the crew that they sent to Mars had to have a bunch of these Tumblr creatures on the crew? And if they spent half their fucking time arguing about pronouns instead of fucking landing the Mars lander? Stupid, frivolous bullshit is dominating every sphere of public life. I don't understand how it's happening. It's terrifying. At the same time, I can't really caution a lot of the stuff the conservatives say, so I can't, I'm kind of stuck in limbo between the two. There's stuff that the left is right about, like wealth inequality and automation. And there's stuff that the right is right about, like the fact that we should at least stay recognizably human and not completely surgically mutate ourselves into flipper aliens or something. The big problem is that pisses off everybody. Everybody wants you to be an extremist with them. They want to convert you. They want you to drink the Kool-Aid and to be 100% in the pocket of their ideology. And if you're in the opposite camp, they at least understand that and they have rehearsed arguments and can fight you. What makes them uncomfortable and thus extremely angry is a fence sitter. Because they don't know how to argue, so they can't convince you of what they believe. You just have to already buy into it. It's very, very much like arguing with a religious person who is not equipped to explain to you why their beliefs are true. They just expect you to already hold them, and they get flustered and angry and sometimes violently angry with you if you don't believe the same things. because they rely completely on being surrounded by people who share their beliefs in order to shore them up. This shit's crazy, man. I just want to go to space and leave most of humanity behind. I have that. I still need... What time is it? Oh, it's almost... I spent too much time talking. This is the whole fucking episode. I didn't even get anything done. This was the politics episode. I hope you're happy. Hope you found that edifying. I hope that was worth the 30 minutes of doing dick all in Minecraft. That's politics in a nutshell, man. Just a bunch of fucking talking and nothing gets done. Click like and subscribe. I don't know why you would, but I'd still like you to. And hopefully on the next episode, I'll go and shovel some sand into my fucking inventory, smelt it, and go finish that dome in the Nether. And we can start to plant some nice flowers and trees and not talk about politics or gender or any of the other things that families fight about on Thanksgiving.